people talk about the AR-15 today, they talk about it as if it was inevitable, perfected, refined, obvious. But the first AR-15s were none of those things. They were controversial, fragile looking, aluminum and plastic in a world that trusted steel and wood. Senior officers laughed at them. Soldiers didn't trust them, and yet, within a decade, this strange rifle would replace the battle rifles that came before it. Today we're going back to the beginning, before the myths, before the manuals, into the first era of the AR-15, from the original Colt 601 to the M16A1, and how a revolutionary idea survived its most dangerous years. Before the M16 became a battlefield rifle, it was a sales pitch. Before doctrine, bureaucracy, and Vietnam, there was a rifle that trusted engineering over tradition. The Colt 601 was Colt's first production AR-15. It was manufactured in the late 50s and early 60s, right after Colt purchased the AR-15 pattern from Armalite. And it was not a finalized military rifle, it was a sales rifle. It was meant to convince US military decision makers, foreign militaries, and especially US Air Force evaluators that this design was sound. The 601 embodied three radical ideas for its time. Extreme weight reduction, being that it's built out of aerospace aluminum and plastics. It has minimal steel where required and has a pencil-thin barrel. At 6 pounds unloaded, the 601 felt like a feather compared to the M1 Garand that came before it. It has modern ergonomics with its inline stock and recoil system, as well as a pistol grip, and the visual modernity of looking futuristic. Not like a rifle that would have been used in World War II or Korea. And this was all intentional marketing. The iconic green fiberglass furniture wasn't chosen for camouflage. Early fiberglass resins naturally cured green. Black dye consistency hadn't been solved yet, and Colt was really leaning into that space age aesthetic. So the handguards, pistol grips, and stocks, yes, they were green, but that green varied wildly in shade. It could be pale mint all the way to deep olive, because at that time, the quality control of pigmentation was very primitive. Collectors today obsess over these variations and the authenticity within. The Colt 601 is also part of the slick side era, meaning that there would be no forward assist, just clean, uninterrupted lines. There was no forward assist at the time, as Eugene Stoner believed that shoving around into the chamber was probably a bad idea. The rifle was designed around clean burning ammo assumptions, and simplicity and weight savings were prioritized. The 601 had the 20-inch barrel, pencil thin, however, with a 1 in 14 twist rate, which was optimized to fire 55 grain ammunition in warm climates. In colder weather, the 55 grain coming out of the 1 in 14 twist had marginal stability, which showed an early sign that a change needed to be made. So the 602 onward would move to the 1 in 12 twist for 55 grain ammunition. The 601 also had a chrome bolt, carrier, and firing pin, but it was smooth because there was no forward assist, so these lines wouldn't have been here. Chrome plating made it easy to clean, resist corrosion, and reduce friction. I have a 1911 that I'm getting full chromed soon. The early metallurgy of the bolt was not fully matured. Gas key staking was inconsistent, and bolt lugs often cracked under fire. The gun worked, but it was not yet optimized for combat use. The guns were designed to have selective fire for safe, semi, and full, and it handled very well under full auto due to the inline recoil system, lightweight reciprocating mass, and mild recoil impulse of the round. However, with the pencil-thin barrel, it was sensitive to heat buildup and barrel whip, showing that it was a great light infantry weapon, not a machine gun. These first models seemed almost individual and handmade. They used early anodizing techniques, which gave a gray and sometimes purple hue on your receiver, and the texture across the surface tended to be inconsistent. But the gun had a mechanical honesty, nothing unnecessary and nothing hidden. The 601 saw limited use in Air Force testing, very small-scale foreign military adoption, but it mainly saw early advisory use in the Vietnam War by Green Berets. It was never standardized for the Green Berets or the military at all, but it proved the concept of the AR-15. Without it, we'd have no 602, no M16, and no modern ecosystem. But the 601 is the purest design of Eugene Stoner's vision. The rifle was unburdened by bureaucracy, and it was built with engineering over military doctrine. It represents a moment in time where the infantryman's rifle entered the modern era. Next up is the 602. The 602 represents Colt tightening up its production while also maintaining these slick, early features that end up disappearing later on. Like I mentioned, the barrel twist went from a 1 in 14 to a 1 in 12, better stabilizing a 55 grain as well as being able to handle longer tracer rounds. And where the 601 had the original Armalite chamber, the 602 moves to a longer throat that would be carried forward on every model. The 602 would also transition to this 3-prong bill rather than the original duckbill that you see here. And they moved to the standard charging handle pattern that became the norm. The 602 moves to black, though there is overlap because green furniture already existed to be able to slap on. The 601 has no markings for the sights, and the 602 does have an R marking for right windage. Both the 601 and 2 were slick slide, so no forward assist. And many of the small controls changed, like pins, bolt catch, etc. The 601 and 602 really made an impact in the early days of Vietnam, think 1962 to 64. The Green Berets and South Vietnamese put in the work to make sure this rifle was field tested and became what it was meant to be. You often see these waffle pattern magazines in use during this time, but as soon as your kind of standard style was developed, you don't see these produced anymore. I also have this 25 round, which I don't think is historically accurate, but it looks cool. The feedback that the Green Berets gave this rifle were that they loved extreme lightweight compared to the M14. It had high controllability in jungle warfare, and they praised its ease of use and lethality. The 601 and 602 proved the concept, but the rifle is not yet standardized and ready for mass issuance. Since we're talking about the slick side ARs here, I'm going to skip the Colt 603 and talk about the 604 for a moment. 604 is what becomes the original M16. After feedback on the 602, the US Air Force adopted the 604 as the M16 rifle. The specs are basically the same as the 602, but standardized for issuance. Now you had the Colt roll marks, and it's important to mention that the Air Force stuck with the slick side, so no forward assist. Back to the 603. This is the Colt designator for what became the XM16E1, or the experimental M16 E1. This designation came with feedback from the Army, rather than the Air Force, and this would eventually become the M16A1. Since we've talked about slick sides, we'll now call this the forward assist line of the AR-15 evolution. This becomes the defining M16 variant of the Vietnam buildup. Where the earlier models were issued to special forces for field testing, the XM16E1 was issued to field units for the battlefield to fight the war. This is the gun you see Sam Elliott and Mel Gibson using in We Were Soldiers, and that's actually what I modeled this off of. These are all original parts, minus the BCG and barrel that I got from Brownells. And the lower is actually reinforced, like more A2 style, but everything else is original M16A1 that fell off a truck. Just like the Air Force slick side lineage, the Army lineage still prioritized that simplicity and lightweight, but they demanded a forward assist. A way to manually push the bolt into battery if it didn't do it on its own. And that's what drove the development of the 603. So the way it works is you push this button, and there's lines here that you can see. So if this isn't all the way in battery, you can push it into battery. The Army wanted this because of doctrine, not because the rifle actually needed it. You see, the Army had decades of experience on the M1 Garand and then the M14, which, when you operate the bullet, you can manually force it closed. And soldiers were doing that for years. The AR-15 is not an M1 Garand. To the Army, a rifle that couldn't be manually closed felt risky. The forward assist was almost seen as an insurance, so that old doctrine would carry into this platform. Essentially, it's one more option if something goes wrong. Should you do that? I don't think so. But that was the thought at the time. That's it. Moving on, Historical sources generally say that the transition from the XM16E1 to your standard M16A1 happened in February of 1967, because that's when the X designator was dropped. However, most changes from the E1 to the A1 took place naturally over time. Being a very gradual transition, you'll often see an XM16E1 or M16A1, and it could actually be the opposite, just because parts got changed as they got rearmed and as parts became available. But let's talk about some general timelines. Let's talk about chroming. In 1967, the AR-15 got a chrome-lined chamber, but not bore. This was to address the humid jungle causing a bit of corrosion and stuck cases failing to extract. This was on late experimental and early A1s. In 1970, we got full chrome-lined chamber and bore. This greatly improved corrosion resistance in the barrel, made cleaning easier, and increased the barrel life. This became standard on all M16A1s. Post-1970, all M16s got this. Chrome lining was a huge push back then because it was one of the fatal flaws of the M16. And soldiers noticed the difference with the chrome lining. Reputation of the rifle improved dramatically. You can see both this 3-prong and birdcage style flash hiders on the earlier M16E1s and the A1s. It was a gradual period. After the 3-prong, they transitioned to these bird cages, but unlike these A2s, these lines were all the way around, so there was no flat bottom. You'll notice here that there's fencing around here. The earlier slick sides did not have any of this. That caused magazines to fall out of weapons by walking around in the jungle, having your rifle bump up against your gear, or maybe while you were in a vehicle. So feedback from early Green Berets and then soldiers led to the adding of this fencing and the forging of the receivers. The first fencing was just this line here, and then later fencing went all the way around the magazine release. The fencing would be carried over to every AR-15 you see today. It doesn't really add weight. It makes the receiver wall stronger, and it's better ergonomically for the rifle. The M16A1 rifle is also associated with adding a trapdoor butt plate to the stock. This allowed soldiers to carry their cleaning kits in their rifle. Markings on these rifles vary by year, and you can go down a huge rabbit hole of the roll marks that these rifles had. But a wave top would be 1964 to 67. You'll see XM16A1 markings, and after 67, you see M16A1 markings. When you are building these, you do get a lot of leeway when it comes to cloning, because there is so much gradual change that often you can throw a part on, and it would have been accurate for the era. So you're really cloning the M16 in a specific year rather than a specific model. Vietnam rifles were often rebuilt, upgraded, mixed, so photo ID is not clean. Lucky for us. Like I said, I built this to try to look like the Ya Drang battle from when we were soldiers. It's a mix mash of parts, and I love it. It feeds the tism. So the M16A1 family is where it really stops being a new rifle with some teething issues and becomes our standardized service rifle. The last family of AR-15s from this first generation is the CAR-15s, which includes the XM177 carbines. These carbines are better understood as more of a system. The carbine, the moderator, different furniture, not just a short M16. XM177 is sort of a Colt shorthand umbrella term to refer to short 5.56 carbines with a moderator. When it comes to the modeling, you'll see XM177E1, which is a Colt model 609, and XM177E2, which is a Colt model 629. But it's not always called XM177 in official paperwork. You'll also see model 610 and GAU-5, which is the Air Force's designation. But generally, if you hear XM177, it's referring to a CAR-15 commando-style carbine, not a 20-inch rifle like this. Why did they make it? Well, give me M16 firepower and something shorter and more handy. To help with the timing and pressure and flash reduction in a way, that's what the 4.5-inch modulator came from. It looks like a suppressor, but it's not. It does help in flash reduction. It does help with blast concussion mitigation, and the back pressure helped it function. To me, because they had to add the moderator to get everything working properly, you're only an inch shorter than a rifle. Just use the M16 at that point. But if you're interested, the way you can kind of identify them, the E1 or the 609 are associated with having a 10-inch barrel, as well as slightly earlier details, and the E2 or 629 has the 11.5-inch barrels. I'm not super into these, but if you're interested, I will go down the TISM rabbit hole and make a detailed video on them for you. Let me know below. It is important to mention that they weren't just chopped down M16s. The gas port was moved, different pressures had to be accounted for, and there will be a later engineering video on the AR-15 that goes through all sorts of gassing and cyclic rates and parts wear and everything, so stay tuned. But changing port size and gas tube length and buffer weights and all that, over time they figured it out, and now we have M4s, so. They are cool looking though, with the A1 uppers, those early short hand guards, pencil barrel with a moderator. There is some sex appeal there. They were used by MACV SOG, LLRP units, special forces, and other recon elements. I see it as the bridge, the not missing link, that kind of shows where we were thinking early on and how we ended up with the M4 as a standard service rifle. And although like the defining war of these early generation rifles is the Vietnam War, they were also used in the Dominican Civil War, the Laotian Civil War, Laotian, the Cambodian Civil War, used by Israel Defense Forces in the Yom Kippur War, the Lebanese Civil War, the El Salvador Civil War, the Nicaraguan conflict, also kind of a civil war, and Operation Urgent Fury, Grenada, 1983. You also still see these in the Gulf War, because not every unit had their A2s by then. The M16A1 endured. It was lightweight, had a very effective cartridge in the M193. The US handed them out when we were done with them, so you see them as a military aid distribution all over the world. And it's just a great platform, easy to train on, easy to use. So the bottom line is, it's not just a Vietnam rifle. It was our global Cold War service weapon that influenced basically every service weapon of today. Think of the early AR-15 not as a gun, but as a mid-century industrial art piece. A sculpture born from slide rules, drafting tables, and the optimism of aerospace engineering. The rifle of this era rejects decoration outright. There's no flourish, no excess, no attempt to impress the eye through tradition. Its beauty comes from lines and proportion. The long, uninterrupted barrel draws the eye forward like a horizon. The straight stock forms a clean axis, giving the rifle a calm, almost architectural balance. Everything aligns. Nothing fights itself. It is minimalist in the same way a modernist building is minimalist, because every unnecessary element has been removed. The forged aluminum receivers are the heart of the piece. Their muted gray-black anodizing absorbs light rather than reflecting it, giving the rifle a soft, almost matte dignity. Slight variations in tone between upper and lower aren't flaws, they're brushstrokes. Evidence of human hands and wartime production. The fence on the lower receiver is especially telling. An asymmetrical detail that breaks perfection just enough to remind you this is a living design, evolving in real time. Steel and aluminum, matte and satin. The triangular handguards are the boldest artistic statement on the rifle. Sharp lines, faceted surfaces, unapologetically angular. They look almost sculpted rather than molded. They are uncomfortable by traditional aesthetic standards, and that's the point. They belong to the same visual language as brutalist architecture. Strong shapes, exposed function, beauty through purpose. The M16A1 doesn't try to look timeless. It looks of its moment. The 1960s belief that technology, weight reduction, and new materials would reshape the future. And that is what elevates it to art. It is honest. It is restrained. It is confident enough not to embellish itself. The AR of the time is not beautiful because it was made to be admired. It is beautiful because it was made with absolute conviction. By the time the M16A1 emerged, the AR-15 is no longer an experiment. What began as an optimistic lightweight prototype, designed around engineering theory with ideal conditions, had been reshaped by combat, ammunition realities, and institutional trust or distrust. Every change we've discussed from the 601 onward, from twist rates to chrome lining, from slick side receivers to forward assists, reflects lessons learned the hard way. The first era of the AR-15 isn't about a single rifle model. It's about a philosophy colliding with reality. The early rifles trusted simplicity. Later rifles demanded redundancy. And the M16A1 sits at the crossroads, where theory finally met war. Everything that comes after, the A2, the carbine generation, our modern AR ecosystem, rests on the decisions that were made during this narrow window of time. And understanding this era explains why the AR-15 looks the way it does today. Like and subscribe. There's more coming.